Today my typically jolly and engaging teacher suddenly broke down in front of the class. Reddit, what are your quickly escalating stories? My HS science teacher was a pretty quiet nice guy. We had no idea that his wife was terminally ill. One day in the middle of class the principal came to the door and asked him out into the hallway. The conversation only took 2 minutes, but when he came in he just gathered up his papers, put them in a folder and sat at the desk. At first we thought he was going to tell us something, then he just broke down hysterical crying. He began hyperventilating. A person went to get the nurse. Then he started having a seizure. We straightened him out on the floor. I put his head on my lap and moved away anything he could hurt himself on. Apparently he had a stroke shortly after that and was never able to come back to school. Very sad day. The story I have took place in a high school class that a friend was in. I think it was a health class and they had a pregnant teacher who was pretty average and boring as far as teachers go. One morning, she comes to class late with disheveled hair, red eyes and smudged makeup. Setting her things down, she sat on her desk and stared at the class for a while before saying, "I've just had a miscarriage. Let's talk about it. Does anyone have any questions?" I was told the class went silent. Tears began rolling down her face as she watched them. They stared back, equally wide-eyed and scared. I'm not sure if they knew she was pregnant before the event. If it was a health class, then it could be considered relevant to her topic. But honestly it's such an emotionally charged topic I don't think I could handle a bunch of high schoolers poking at it that soon after the event. I had a German teacher that seemed okay until the day she disrobed on a school bus in front of her class during a field trip. I wasn't there but I most certainly heard all about it. I think she took a couple of weeks off and came back like nothing happened but I don't recall all the details. It was 19 years ago. VUCAT. My computer science teacher in middle school lost his crap and threw an entire desk at a student. Kid got out of the way, but frankly, we all wish he would have gotten hit. The teacher was a nice guy who had to deal with a lot of stupid kids, especially a lot who simply didn't have the brain to understand computer science. That led to the idiots of the class doing nothing but pranks. Finally, one day, the biggest douchebag in the class cracked a joke about functions sounding like the word frick. I only remember that joke because it was so stupid, and the teacher stopped talking, stamped on over to the desk, and without a word, threw it at the kid. He was fired a few hours later. I am never more delighted than when a student gives me a thank you card. No amount of scented candles or other balls teacher gifts will ever equal a heartfelt note from one of my students. Speaking of teachers breaking down, my roommate stay for a humanities class sent out the following email to the entire class at 4:30 AM. Dear CH203, 1206, students. I had one student in our class came up to me after class questioning my integrity and my ability to grade your response papers. This student informs me that the student had a long history and experience of writing an academic formal paper and had the audacity to question and mock my reasoning and explanation for the seemingly disappointing response paper grade. For those who feel the need to insult me and question my integrity to grade your papers, I will scan your papers and send them to Dr. Wild so that you will get the strictest and adequate. Since you made it abundantly clear that I am an incompetent grader, grade that you truly deserve, I do not have to provide an objective. For those students with unrealistic expectations, no explanation will ever be objective. Do not try to negotiate with me. I will not change your response paper grades. Take it up with Dr. Wilds and she will correct and curve your morbid and stupid this class supposed to be easy. CH203 is not your W. Expectations. Do not ask me about the exams, midterm and final, and about the response papers during our discussion sessions. You are wasting your and my time by doing so. And, do not for whatever reason, ask me whether someone already had an A on the response papers. Ask inappropriate questions like these, and I will ask you to leave the class, and my site, immediately. There is such a thing as negative participation. Disrespect me and I will mark you down. Don't like the rules? Then get the heck out of my class. Stop whining. Do all the readings that are required. Do not ask stupid questions. If you have to say, this might be a stupid question, then don't ask, and I will be waiting for an apology from that student. From your disappointed and quite furious discussion leader. When I was in intermediate, middle school if you live in the US, we had this absolutely insane woodwork teacher. One day our class had to make chessboards, and because he didn't trust a group of 13-year-olds with saws, he cut the wood and we just nailed it together. About halfway through the lesson this girl went up to him to ask if she had made it right. The angles on it were crooked, and when he saw it, he freaking lost it. He started screaming at the girl, telling her she was useless, saying her work was a piece of crap. The whole time the entire class was just staring at him, dead silent. The girl started crying and he took her outside and continued to scream at her. Then 5 minutes later, he came back inside, looked at the box and announced to the class that he'd just cut the wood wrong. Whoa, what a prick. I had a woodworking teacher in middle school that once got really angry and had the class stay at their tables while he ranted about the program being cut and kicked stuff across the room. To be fair, he was losing his job and he was a nice guy the rest of the time. When I was in Boy Scouts we were having a troop meeting. We had an older British guy who helped out every once in a while. He fought in World War II I think. We were all in the social hall with those cheap metal folding chairs. The scouts were doing some rearranging and a couple of chairs fell off a table and crashed to the ground. Instantly the British guy fell into a flashback and flipped, transporting himself into the war. It was crazy. After getting him calmed out, meeting ended. Remind me of my dad. Just come back from Afghanistan and him and a load of other army guys were on a ref break. A car backfires and they all hit the deck. After remembering where they were they all got up laughing. I remember my French teacher flipping the heck out because someone asked what age she was. She threw an overhead against the wall, told us she hated us, and ran out of the room crying. Then a librarian came in and yelled at us for 10 minutes and told us we should be ashamed. It sounds like she should try to act her age. I had a teacher in middle school that was angry all the time, with a look of barely contained hate on his face. Once he started yelling so loud at a girl that she fainted. My high school English teacher was a normally very sarcastic and funny guy. He taught us serious things but tried to keep the tone generally light and airy. One day, he went off about the laws regarding motels around schools because of child prostitution and kidnapping and sexual abuse. It was intense and he had to stop talking for a minute because he was close to tears. He was raging, and it was honestly kind of scary because he was a very tall and intimidating guy. It was nothing at all like his normal tone when he taught, even when he was mad at us. To everyone else it seemed totally out of the blue, and it definitely escalated quickly. But I'm also going to love him forever because I had just admitted to him that I'd been sexually abused as a kid. It felt like he was standing up for me. TLDR. I miss my high school English teacher. In 7th grade our language arts teacher was getting us prepared to take the state writing test. It's a big deal, but I guess we weren't taking it seriously and we were writing poorly. So one day she comes into class and is very serious. She tells us that we aren't doing well enough on our papers and so she is quitting her job and leaving school unless we can all write papers convincing enough to get her to stay. We all kicked butt on our papers that day and passed our writing test. And it wasn't until later on that I realized it was all just a ploy to get us to take our test more seriously. Had a fun teacher in 7th grade, the kind where you never really learned anything in his class, but he helped pique my interest in video production by assigning us film projects all the time. One day he got a call. He stepped out into the hall to take it, came back a few minutes later, sits down at his desk, and then starts screaming for everyone to be quiet. Went absolutely ballistic. It went on for about 10 minutes until he told everyone to just shut up and read. One of the few times I've seen a group of people stunned into absolute silence. The next day an announcement came on that a faculty member of the school had passed away suddenly. My teacher was a close friend and got a call from the family when it happened. He was crying when he apologized to the class for yelling at everyone and explained he wasn't allowed to tell anyone until the school had officially been alerted. School held a memorial in honor of the guy who passed. It was very emotional. I've seen a lot of teachers lose it, but that was one of the times where it stuck with me. In 7th grade I had a history teacher named Mr. R. He happened to be a veteran of multiple tours in Vietnam and was a very patriotic individual. One day during the Pledge of Allegiance, a kid in my class named C refused to stand for the pledge. Mr. R with tears in his eyes took C and put him head first into a trash can. He was suspended for the rest of the year, but is teaching again at the same school. This is the second time this happened with him and a student. They should make a film of this. It could be called Tough Times in Alphabet World. People would queue round the block to see it. In secondary school we had a maths teacher who was constantly late for class. We were the top maths class, nerds, and in our final year so we were all pretty intense about school, needing good grades to get into college and whatnot. So anyway, everyone was fed up with this lady, who wasn't the most amazing teacher anyway, and a few students went to our principal to complain about wasted class time. Next day she comes into class and apologizes to the students. She then proceeds to explain that she is under a lot of stress due to the fact she is very ill at the moment. We knew she was diabetic and requires a kidney transplant. The whole time she was trying and failing to hold back tears. When she had finished, the classroom was completely silent. Everyone was in shock. Only 2 people out of the class had complained, but everyone felt the most awful guilt. The idea that our dissatisfaction had caused this woman to break down in front of us, apologizing and having to expose details of her personal life to a group of 18-year-olds was gut-wrenching. Needless to say, no one said another word about it and class carried on as if nothing happened for the rest of the year. Last I heard, she is doing very well now, so I can only assume she got the transplant. I was in like 3rd or 4th grade. I was a very shy child and I was riding the bus to school one morning. Well, back then the bus drivers would take attendance once we arrived at the school. Not sure why. Anyways, people always say my name wrong, and as he was calling people's names, they are all here, blah blah blah. Well, he gets to my name and again, like he has all year, says my name wrong. Well, like I said, I was a very shy child and soft spoken, and I say here, but my name is Hallie, and he starts yelling my name cause he didn't hear me, so I spoke touch louder and again kindly reminded him how to pronounce my name. He gets so furious that he throws his clipboard, gets up out of his driver's chair and storms to the back of the bus where I was assigned to sit and grabs me by my arm and just starts screaming at me that I can say your name however I dang well please, but speak up little girl. I can't hear your little mousy voice. Why aren't you looking at me when I talk to you? What are you, stupid or something? Then shoves me back into my seat and goes back seat and goes back seat and goes back seat and goes back seat. I'm hysterically crying at this point, and apparently one of the teachers that makes sure the kids get inside safely heard all this and pulls me aside. They ended up calling my mom and I was allowed to go home for the rest of the day because I was just so hysterical and no one could calm me down. Needless to say, he never drove our bus again, or any bus for that matter. Similar thing happened in my class this year. Think it was 1 or 2 months ago. My history teacher is always very happy and sympathetic. You know, the kind of person who wakes up every day at 6 AM and gets into the classroom with a smile that goes from ear to ear, yelling good morning. Got in our class one day and started crying and saying how she was diagnosed with depression. The class, about 40 teenagers 15-17 years old, was dead silent. No one had anything to say after that. My high school substitute teacher once was giving a lecture about a novel we were reading. Suddenly she burst into tears and told the class that you can get pregnant even if there's no penetration and the guy is just rubbing himself on your underwear. Then she ran out of the room bawling. Good to know. In high school, I had a history teacher who was known to be anti-Bush. Like, someone would say something we thought was innocuous and he'd go off for the rest of the period on how horrible Bush was. At 15, we just thought it was funny and didn't think much of it. My senior year, he became ill and took some time off of school. It was right around the elections and we joked that if Bush won again, our professor would kick the bucket, just decide life wasn't worth living and croak. Turns out he was having major heart issues that none of us knew about, and about 2 weeks after Bush won his second term as president, our professor died. You won your Deadpool. In an early morning college course, professor walks in, slightly distracted. She informs us that there has been a terrible plane crash in New York. We were in California and that though she didn't know anyone involved, she would be checking updates on her laptop throughout her lecture. Okay, fine. So, First time she checks, she gets more distracted. Second time, her voice is breaking. Third time, she lets out a little sob, shuts off the overhead and tells us class is cancelled and walks out. We all sat there sort of talking crap about her, wondering if she was having some sort of a psychological breakdown, sobbing over a plane crash she didn't even know anyone involved in. Then we all walked out of the lecture hall and saw that they had set up televisions all over campus so everyone could follow what was going on. It was the 11th of September, 2001 and we all felt like huge buttholes afterwards. I had a chemistry teacher in high school who was one of the few teachers I absolutely and truly respected. Absolute great guy, great sense of humor, and he was a guy that clearly loved the topic he taught. He was one of those teachers who you could actually joke with and had no problem taunting you back about things. One day in class, he was trying to explain something on the board. For some reason that day, he had a hard time getting everyone in the class to pay attention and get involved, and people were pretty blatantly ignoring him and having conversations while he was talking. He turned around, and mid-explanation just stopped. He took one look at the class, slammed his textbook close, turned off the projector and threw the can of markers at the wall. He turned to us and said, "You don't want to learn? Fine. I'm freaking done with this crap," and promptly walked out of the classroom back to his office. Class just kinda sat there for a few minutes before a few of us walked over to his office and asked him to please come back and finish the lesson. After some calming down he did, walked back into the room, opened up his textbook and just kept going as if nothing happened. Needless to say the class paid more attention to him. TLDR. Teacher got fed up with students, said frick this crap, walked out on the class. Teachers should have the power to do that without repercussions. When I played Little League Baseball there was a huge brawl between my coaches and the other team's coaches. We were really young so we were in what was called a coach pitch league. Exactly what it sounds like, transition between T-ball and the kids pitching. By rule the play was over when the defensive team returned the ball to the other team's coach. Each coach pitched to their own team. If a runner was more than halfway between a set of bases, they would advance to the next base, and if they were not at least halfway they went back. This particular day my coach felt that the opposing coach was giving his players a little too much leeway with when they could advance. After a few shouts from the dugout over a few innings, my coach storms out to the mound and starts screaming at the other coach. One thing led to another and punches began to be thrown. This led to assistant coaches from each team also storming the mound and having a full-on brawl as 20 plus 4-5-year-old kids watched in confusion. I was a catcher, so in my little 5-year-old mind I thought I should help, as I was wearing a helmet, chest protector and shin pads. Clearly no one could possibly hurt me. Before I even took 2 steps toward the mound the volunteer ump grabbed me and told me to stay there. The fight ended up with, from the best of my recollection, 1 broken leg that required surgery, 3 broken noses, a broken arm, 4 arrests and 8 coaches' parents being banned from even attending a little league game. All because my coach thought the other coach was letting his team take an extra base a few times in a game where they didn't keep score. TLDR. Even if they don't keep score, coach pitch little league is serious freaking business. That's roughly the same way one starts an international war. It's not a very well paid job. She probably does it because she loves it and loves kids. A card would be nice. I wasn't a particularly misbehaved child at school. One physics lesson we had a stand-in teacher. He was from Newcastle, and they have a very distinctive accent up there. After explaining something, I don't remember what, he asked if we've understood it, and I chirped up "way I man," which is what I think they say up there when they mean yes. He promptly leapt at me, grabbed my collar, wrestled me to the floor and screamed and swore in my face. I don't remember what. I remember the whole class being totally shocked. It was one of the most surprising and funny things that had ever happened to me. Poor guy. He didn't apologize. I didn't report him. We never spoke of it again, nor did I cheek him again. Now I wouldn't recommend any teacher reprimanding anyone like this, but it worked with me. As someone from Newcastle, he likely mistook you for a fellow local and tried to give you what we refer to up here as hugs. Next time, spit in his eye and build some ships together. You'll be best friends for life. One day in 2nd grade my teacher got a phone call and was at her desk talking for a while. The class started talking and being kind of loud. Nothing crazy, just laughing and talking because we were bored 7-year-olds. When she got off the phone she started screaming at us about how disrespectful it was to talk while she was on the phone. She informed us it was the high school calling to tell her that her son broke his arm in football practice. She continued screaming and asked each of us individually how we would feel if we were on the phone being told our parents were dead, in a car accident, etc. And people were talking in the background. It was the first time I realized my parents would die and it traumatized me for years. The same teacher had another insane episode on her birthday. We went to a different room for Spanish lessons every day with the Spanish teacher. We learned how to say happy birthday in Spanish and the Spanish teacher took us back to our homeroom a little early so we could surprise our teacher when she came back. We were trying to make it like a surprise party where everyone jumps out when the guest of honor walks in. When the teacher walked in, we all said Feliz cumpleaños expecting she would be delighted, but instead she looked furious and walked right back out of the room. When she eventually came back she told us we were rude for going in the room when she wasn't there and scaring her. Such a b. She informed us it was the high school calling to tell her that her son broke his arm in football practice. How we would feel if we were on the phone being told our parents were dead, in a car accident, etc. That's not even close to the same thing. Sophomore year of high school, my Spanish teacher was like a second mom. Fed us, gave us hot chocolate on cold mornings, brought us cake, etc. I don't remember the exact context, but she made a remark about those little baggies you sell weed coke in, and I jokingly jabbed at her, oh well how you know about those things, and she casually shoots back about how her brother ordered. She knew I didn't say it out of maliciousness and I felt horrible. A couple months later, roughly the same situation. She says something, I ask her again playfully, and she reminds me again and I feel horrible again. One thing leads to another where she ends up sharing the story about what happened. She was teaching one day and her phone rings and she thought it was her kid, so she stepped out into the hallway to answer it and it was the hospital saying he had overdosed. She started running down the hallway and they told her he died and she just collapsed and fainted. She told us she hadn't cried about it before. Cue in her voice cracking. She continues the story while bawling her eyes out while it's dead quiet in the room. She finishes and asks us to finish our morning assignment. Needless to say everyone did so in unison, quietly, and I felt terrible. She was an awesome lady. I made a usually really nice teacher cry once. I was quite the little craphead in high school. The teacher in question was the football coach. Pretty big burly guy. He and his wife had just had a baby. The football team was having a horrible season. There were a lot of talk of teachers and programs getting cut. Just a bad atmosphere for him. Lots of stress. I had made a comment about him being wrong about something in a geology class and he just snapped and started yelling at me to go to the office. So then I made some crappy remark about how he is probably just gonna get fired anyway and then get to raise a baby with no job. He stopped yelling and just broke down into tears. The whole class gasped. I went to the office. I have never felt like more of a scumbag in my life. And I actually really liked him too. No idea why that came out of my mouth. Dude. Physics lab at university. A black thing passes outside window. Some guy says hey. Someone threw a trash can from the 11th floor. A couple of minutes later one teacher knocks at the door and talked to our teacher about the trash can. It was the suicide of his best friend. Also teacher. He began to cry and went outside. Teachers have to put on a mask when they come into class. They put up a barrier between focusing on what needs to be done and teaching their students and all other baggage at home. Well, everyone has to do this. Really. People just reach breaking points sometimes. My band teacher in middle school would break down because a bunch of us shats in class were never listening to her and always messing around. This would happen about once a week. She would burst into tears and lock herself in her office, sometimes for the entire rest of the class. It was really sad. She was a good person. I felt really bad for her and always made sure to tell her she was doing a great job and I really enjoyed her class. Teaching can be great when you're having a crappy time at home for whatever reason though, because the mask also keeps feelings in. I can go all day without thinking of the pretty disastrous state of my life, on occasion. One day in class my teacher was talking to some fellow students and she jokingly said, "Oh, pancakes is like a son to me" for some reason. The class slacker decided to chip into the conversation by saying, "Yeah, the son you'll never have." Now normally this wouldn't sound so bad, except this teacher had just missed a couple of days of school after having a miscarriage and finding out she was unable to have children. She looked stone-faced at the kid and promptly burst into tears. She soon left the classroom and everyone sat there silently for the next 15 minutes until another teacher came in and watched us. Slacker kid never came back to the class because he felt so bad. In high school I had an English teacher who made us read the things they carried. It turns out he was a Vietnam vet. He made various students read aloud. I guess he saw some serious crap because when someone read a particularly intense portion, the teacher started shaking, dived under his desk, yelled incoming and proceeded to yell and sob uncontrollably. He took the rest of the week off. My drama teacher was a spaz and could never keep it together, always yelling at us, so I started saying "red alert" under my breath every time he lost it, and I did this for almost a year till finally one day he started screaming "red alert" over and over again in my face. Then he sent me to the principal's office and then he had a breakdown and never came back. I feel like crap about it now. I also had a band director who threw chalk at kids and kept vodka in his desk. He retired on his terms with a full pension. I had an English professor that was late for class. I remember waiting 15 minutes, then 5 more and eventually just went to the library instead of waiting outside. Well, apparently she got to the classroom and no one was waiting. Door was locked, so we were just milling about in the hall and had a breakdown. After the whole class was gathered up, we were huddled into the room and given an extremely intense chewing out from our history teacher about how disrespectful we had been. Years later I was told she had just been informed she could never have children after a miscarriage or something to that effect. I believe she eventually did manage to have a kid, but I don't think she ever returned to teaching. Unfortunately I was that student during this episode of Teachers Gone Crazy. It was my freshman year of HS and my Spanish teacher, coincidence, was a real hard butt and apparently she was a B to the faculty as well. She was the head of the department. Everyone sorta took it because not a year ago, she lost her husband, terminal illness, and son, car accident or something, in a 1-week span. Anyway, she spoke in Spanish for the entire class and really cut us no slack. The class average was really low and I tried really hard to do well, but making that huge leap in difficulty for a foreign language that I never used outside of class was tough. The first 2 years of Spanish in middle school were really easy and I simply did not expect it to be this tough. Anyway, she was going over HW in class and she singled me out, saying unlike Mr. Ilbijo, who after 1 week still can't get yada yada yada. Nobody laughed. People just started at her and me really awkwardly. I was freaking pee. I slammed my hand down on my desk really loud and said, "Do I look Spanish? No, I'm Korean." We're all trying really hard to learn this language that most of us have yet to use in real life, whereas you probably grew up speaking the language and studied it in college. Look, everyone knows about what happened in your past, but I'm not tiptoeing around that, nor am I going to let you try and humiliate me. I'm a student. Teach me. Don't throw assignments at me and attempt to humiliate me. Give me a C and let me cut the rest of the class so I can study for a class that I actually care about. I was expecting be thrown out and sent to the principal, but she kinda stood there in shock for a few minutes. She then started speaking in a flustered manner, not completing sentences like, "Well, I try my best to be a teacher. I want my students to do well. I didn't know it was so difficult." And I interrupted her and said, "You're not a bad teacher. Just be sensitive that learning a foreign language is incredibly difficult, especially if we meet just 4 times a week and we have a lot of other classes to worry about." It actually had a positive effect. She became nicer. Her class walk got a bit easier to understand, not easier, and she was a bit more cheery. That's the kind of thing that I hope I one day get a chance to do, seeing as I am still in high school. Well, since everyone is giving sad stories, I'll toss one in to lighten the mood. In grade 8 I had a remarkable English teacher. She taught me skills that were far beyond a grade 8 level because she saw I had the ability for it. She was that kind of teacher, the one who saw every student's potential and fostered it. Anyhow, this year we had a guy in our class who we'll call Stefan. Stefan was soft-spoken, kind and a big kid for grade 8, a gentle giant. However, Stefan had severe learning disabilities and anger issues as a result. Everyone knew this and Stefan wasn't treated differently. If anything, we all made an effort to make him feel like he fit, and he did, socially at least. One day we got back our exams and Stefan had flunked hard. In a fit of rage he flipped a table and ran into the hallway to punch things. Poor guy was real rattled. Our teacher, whose mother was terminally ill at the time, came back into the class after getting Stefan calmed down and began questioning us on how we treated Stefan. It was in one of those calm voices that covered knives. She meant business but was so well spoken as to get an honest response out of the class. When she was satisfied that Stefan was one of the guys and treated as such, she broke into tears. What she told us next I still remember today. "You are all remarkable for how you have adapted to treat this young man. He is facing hardships you cannot imagine. So are other people in this room. That is life. People everywhere have their mountains to climb and loads to bear. You'll affect the lives of thousands and thousands of people before you die. Directly and indirectly, it is your job to make dang sure that you affect them positively. Never underestimate acts of kindness and acceptance, large or small." I was pretty dang honored when she kept some essays of mine for future teaching, and to make sure I hadn't plagiarized. I don't care if this gets buried. Thank you, Mrs. M. TL. Dr. We moved our teacher to the point of tears and then she dropped some mighty fine life advice on us. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.